This is what we hope to be a pretty informal gathering organized by some people from the arts group at Occupy Boston. And the reason we wanted Steve Lambert to come and talk was because his work overlaps with many ideas that have occurred in Occupy Boston, even though what we do in the occupation and Dewey Square doesn't necessarily need to be thought of as art. There is a lot of overlap in the kind of messaging, the thinking about like how to use public space that Steve Lambert's work speaks to in a lot of ways. And we hope that what comes out of this is a lot of conversations and hopefully some new approaches or slightly tweaked approaches to using public space and transforming public space to create dialogue about democracy. So we hope you'll stick around. After the talk, we're going to have a screening of the SM Fix the World, which is a documentary about a group of kind of cultured generals that Steve has done work with. And Marilyn Frankenstein, who's a professor at UMass Boston, will be giving an introduction. She wrote a teaching guide to the film. And so, yeah, we hope this is a edifying and enjoyable evening. And enjoy. There's also food downstairs. So,
yeah. So as I'm speaking, I was walking in front of joke out food. So as I was putting this together, I have parts of other talks that I was kind of pulling things from, and I decided I wanted to make this as practical and helpful as I possibly could, while running the risk of it being a ton of information as kind of efficiently as I can deliver it as possible. So if it's gets to be too much in your brain, if you're saturated, you don't even have to tell me. I'll start to see you nodding off or just being overwhelmed. But anyway, I'm going to do my best. But before, I just wanted to give you guys an idea of some of the work I've done in the past. And this is by no means comprehensive. It's just whatever slides came the fastest. So this was a series of prints that I did. This is the original drawing, and then I made 10 copies. I sold the original for $30, and then the first 3 were 15, and then the second 4 were 20, and then the last 3 were 25. And I sold them all in a day because it's an incredible value. It says $30 and they're 15. So it's sort of like a trick and a game, and I'm going to come back to that idea. This is a giant sign that says "Look away." And it flashes in these mesmerizing patterns. So it's asking you to do this thing that's impossible because it's 9 feet by 9 feet tall. It's just massive and lights up the whole space. This is some benches that I made with Packer Jennings. We redesigned new backings for them, and we incorporated feedback from people that live in the neighborhood about what bothered them most about advertising in public space, and we kind of take those and turn them into new messages. So this often would exist right next to a real estate ad, that was on another bus bench. These are really easy to change out, by the way. There's just a standard bolt on the back. You undo it, and if you have it something, you can just slip it in. These are some signs that I actually make commercial gallery work, which has gotten weirder in the last few years because of the kinds of people that buy it are not really my audience, but I'm working that out. And then this is another one. So they're part of my work too is taking on this voice that isn't necessarily mine. I can speak in the form of a character. This message is meant to be read in a couple different ways. So and then there's this, which you guys probably heard about, which is a New York Times that announced the end of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, but also relates to some other topics in my work that have been about utopia and talking about what's kind of possible in the world. Most recently is this, which this isn't showing up too well, but I'm not going to worry about it. Capitalism works for me, and then there's the scoreboard, right? So people can vote, when we go back, can vote, and I'll show you another slide of this in a bit, whether or not capitalism is working out for them. And I also do work with this guy, Steve Lambert, who's on the right in this picture. And we train grassroots activists on how to use creativity in their work. So this is an image of them actually doing that work. So we've done this in North Carolina and New York, and this year we're doing it 2 workshops in Texas, Maine, and Boston with Enaa and for a Fair Economy. But it's really about like how grassroots activists can use creativity in their work and like make their work more effective. So that's mainly what I'm going to focus on today, because I think that that's going to be the most helpful. I think more than ever, like artists want to make change with their work now, and that's actually a thing that you can do as an artist. It's a lot less taboo than it was, but we still kind of carry around these myths of the artist, of what an artist is. And there's 2 really strong ones. One is that you kind of work. It's a solitary pursuit. You work alone, isolated, kind of off in the middle of nowhere. You guys can.
Do you want me to turn that other light off?
Well, I don't know. Let me check one thing. I have a bunch too that I can do something with this color.
Is that like?
That's better. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, artists work alone. We work in a studio. We make that like, and this is again like sort of stereotypes, real extremes, right? But that art's meant to be very formal, right? It's not art unless it looks really beautiful, or it takes a really long time, and that it's like therapeutic somehow for the artist. But they have stuff, they're like conflicted, on the edges of society, and they're working things out alone in the studio. Like, Van Gogh really kind of ruined this for us. As far as like being insane, working things out on the canvas and then eventually killing himself. And that's a ghost that haunts us still. The other one is like about political art, which would be another sort of extreme. There's probably more of these caricatures I can make, but I'm just going to pick these 2. And with political art, it's like very direct and unambiguous. That it exists. It's political only really in its subject matter, but it has little or no bearing on actual power. I'll come back to this one. And I'm sure you guys have seen this kind of thing, right? So, like politics is subject matter. It has to be super clear, that kind of thing. And I think I'm just going to talk about a few big mistakes that artists can make that Steve Duncombe and I kind of worked out, and you can argue with me about these later. But we call them like I think we had 6 fallacies of political art, so I'm just going to show you a couple of them. The first one is what we call political expressionism. And the idea is that, like abstract expressionism is like artists alone working on this canvas, like capturing their feelings at that moment, right? About whatever. It's that moment and it's their feelings. And with political expressionism, it's the same thing, but it's like their feeling about politics. So this Richard Serra piece that I was showing you before, it's like, this is like just Richard Serra just really pissed, And he's like, he gets out the whatever, the giant charcoal or the oil thing, and he's just like, right? But like this, it's really about him being mad. And so like the message is like stop Bush, right, or stop whatever. But that doesn't actually result in any change or have anything to do with change. It's more about him expressing himself. So this doesn't equal change, it's more equals like, I'm really angry about this. Like it's a way of the artist to tell people that tell the world that they're upset. And my response to this is like, nobody cares. Nobody cares. Like, who cares that Richard Serra is mad about Abu Ghraib? Like it got a little flurry in the art world, but really, like who gives a shit? Who cares that you're mad? Because it's really not all about you and your feelings, and it's about like the sort of broader situation and actually changing it, right? It's important that you're mad about it, but that has to lead to something else. So but expressing that you're mad about it doesn't actually do much of anything. So, you know, we always need to connect these things to larger goals. And when it's disconnected, it's more of like it's much more self-satisfying than it is useful to anyone else. And I think it's about venting too, and our society really thrives on people venting because it's a release, right? So, so that venting always needs to like fuel something else. All right. So number 2 is that knowledge equals power. I'm just going to show you guys this statistic thing really quickly, and you can read through this. So now I'm going to show you. Oh wait, this is even better actually. Usually I pull away these orange parts and you can see the facts. But I can't, I took out that slide. But what difference would it make, right? So it's the same idea. It's like, once you know what's behind these orange things, then you're supposed to like, oh my God, this is fucking horrible. Like we gotta do something, right? But that's not really how things work. You know, like there's a lot of, I think, artwork that's like, or even activism, it's like, we gotta get these facts out there. If people just knew and understood these numbers and the statistics, then everything would change. But we don't really live in a society that has like, where there's monopolies on information anymore. The problem is much more that there's like too many facts out in the world, and too much information, and you know, just fundamentally like a lack of information does not necessarily result in a lack of action. So we all know war is awful, right? Everyone would agree war is horrible. Even soldiers, generals, like everyone. But it happens. So us not knowing that war is horrible or how horrible it is, that doesn't do anything. Or like, you know, if you went to everyone you knew that smoked and said, you know, cigarettes are going to kill you, it's not going to keep you from smoking. There's a lot of really complex reasons why they're smoking. So, so that these facts, like the lack of facts, is not what's preventing change. The next one is sort of related, the truth shall set you free. And it's the idea that, you know, like realist painting or like some expression of like the raw truth of a situation is going to result in change. And people just need to understand the horror for what it is, right? So Guernica, one of the most, you know, revered political paintings, you know, that shows the horror of the war in Spain, didn't stop the war, you know, like they put it up in the UN, they cover it up every once in a while. But it's that kind of raw truth again isn't what's going to change anything. You know, we have journalism. Journalism is really great. You can have images of the war, you can have images of dead bodies and stuff. The same thing that Picasso was painting, but that also, like, you know, like there's a, that's not preventing anything from happening on its own. It serves something else. So, and I think it's much more important for us as artists to think about what we can do that journalism can't do. You know, like journalism has to present things in a very factual way, in a very sort of ordered way. We can do things that journalists can't, but also not to fall into the trap of like aestheticizing social problems, which, you know, like you can, we have this example of, you know, taking pictures of like poor street kids, right? Where the pictures become much more beautiful, and it's about this beautiful image and sad image rather than about the problem, you know? Okay, so another part of this truth thing is that like there is a better truth, you know, like there's lots of truths, and like I know this one truth, and if you just understood this thing, then everything would change. It's the same thing that goes behind like evangelism or the Bible, the Communist Manifesto. If you just see an inconvenient truth, like you gotta see this movie, that those things are helpful when they serve another end, you know, like I don't know what this would be, but a revolution or, you know, like some kind of stopping of climate change, but like just reading the book or, you know, and how annoying is that too? Like you gotta read this book. This book's really important, you know. We were listening to something about the Mormons this morning. Anyway, or like that same kind of, it's the same kind of like screwed up thinking. It's like if everyone just smoked weed, like then everything. So okay, so the number 4 is that this idea of the whole world is watching, and I'm gonna be like critical of my own colleagues. They're like, and they don't actually believe this, but like it's the kind of, we can get caught up in it. It's like the bigger the audience, we can get like a national or international audience to see this thing. The more people, the more likely that change will happen. or it's basically getting caught up in the idea that the media coverage as an end rather than a means to an end. And so it's really important, I think, to think about these goals, and that's a point I'm going to make in a minute. But so why we need artistic activism, and this is what Steve, Duncan, and I, we're the two Steves, have been working on for a while. So that social change actually really needs art. And Steve always makes this point that the first rule of guerrilla warfare in Che Guevara's book is that you have to know the terrain. And that today's terrain is one of like signs and symbols and spectacles, stories. And this is an aesthetic terrain which artists are like trained to navigate, and we're much better at than most people. So the propaganda model is really strong and it's part of these artist myths, right? So like we get this message out there, and it's what I call like the injection model of information delivery. Like we're going to just insert this right into your brain. But I think we really need to avoid this model. Those things I was showing before are examples of this. This is like bad teaching. Like when you have to sit in a classroom and listen to some guy talk for an hour. Much better if I could, spend a little bit more time and we could go back and forth. But again, I'm trying to deliver a lot of information really quickly. We will learn a whole lot better through interaction. And, like this combination of speaking, thinking about something, responding, and then have someone think about that and respond in turn. So we've also thought a lot about like what works as far as artistic activism and creative activism. And so this is like a list of a few things that I wanted to share. The first is like knowing what your goal is. So if you can be aware of what you're actually trying to do and have a clear, really defined, measurable goal, then that gives you kind of a compass point. So, and here's a drawing of that. So if we're here, like you have this idea on the horizon of where you want to be, it's much easier to sort of figure out what you can do to get there. When you have no horizon, you just sort of like or no point on the horizon, you don't even really know what direction to go in. So it can be really clarifying as far as like, what are the right decisions here. So an example of this would be, it drives me nuts when I hear someone say, we're trying to raise awareness. Like, we just want to raise awareness and have a dialogue. Like you never say that. Because you never just want to raise awareness. That's never an end. Like raising awareness is the first step that leads to other things. If all you did was raise awareness, nothing changes, right? So the thing on the horizon is like the world that you want, what winning looks like, what a total victory looks like. And then that can be really helpful as far as like guiding the decisions that you make. And it's really about making conscious choices. And this comes from this study I did of basically like marketing. And stealing stuff from that was also used in like anti-cigarette campaigns and stuff. So the kind of another myth is like we tell people something and then consolidation is a term for like it becomes part of your life. That behavior that you want people to take on, like that's just who they are at some point. Like they've turned it into who they are. So if you're trying to get people to quit smoking, they're non-smokers, like at the end of this. They don't even consider smoking again. That would be consolidation. If you wanted to turn everyone into like anarchists, at this point they're like living on a commune and like sharing chickens and stuff. They've knocked down all the fences in their backyards and no one has property. So, like it works for whatever, you just fill in whatever you're trying to get to. But like the mistake is thinking that, okay, I'm gonna let people know what this is and then we're going to get to consolidation, the revolution will happen, I just need to get this pamphlet out to them and they have to read it. There's actually a bunch of steps that go in between. And there's really, I simplified this, but there's like 7 more or something. So like you let people know about this issue and then they contemplation, they think about it, they decide whether or not they agree, that this is something that makes sense to them. And then the next step would be that they remember this later. And at any point along here, like, you can have a total failure, right? So we can put out a really great poster about, say, the Mayday strike, right? And if it doesn't get someone's attention, right, like the design isn't enough to like grab their eye, then it stops right there. Like you've really never achieved the awareness part. If they think about it and then say, yeah, you know, like that's something I really want to do. I want to be out there on May 1st, but on May 1st they get up and they forget, then that's where that stops, right? So this part, like the awareness part is actually really easy, and the other parts are much harder. So then that morning they might wake up and be like, Mayday strike. I'm excited about it, but I really want to sleep in. I don't feel so good. I have like a kind of a sinus thing happening and a headache, and there's a lot of really good movies on tape today. And they can decide not to actually do it, you know. And then, you know, once they do it, it's like, are they going to become part of the movement, right? So there's all these different points, and you can think of examples of like how this could break down along the way. And so when you have this kind of lens, to me it's like you can make work that happens at any point, right? So you've got, you know, you want to get all the new people out on the Mayday strike, but you also want to remind people that are already into it, like how to come out there. So when you can break it into these steps and think about different audiences, you can be more effective, you know, with each of those audiences. And I'm going to keep coming back to this thing too with some examples. Another sort of communications model is this one. This is an old one, but I don't know who made it. But the idea is that the speaker comes up with this sort of concept, right? Some idea. And then they encode it into a message. So it starts in their brain. They figure out some words to describe it, articulate those words into a message that the audience then hears, and then they have this idea. So this also goes into that like speaking, listening, thinking kind of thing, and it's much better when it's a cycle. But the thing with this communications model is that if this idea is different than this one, then there's some kind of problem, right? There's some problem in how you articulated it. There's a problem in how people are hearing it. There might be noise out here that's preventing people from understanding it. And so that's one way to think of it. And this fits the propaganda model really well, right? Like if we make a poster that we want people to understand a certain way and they misunderstand it, then there's a problem. Okay, the other thing that works is interaction, right? So if you have that happening back and forth instead of just one way. So thinking about how your message can be not necessarily a broadcast, but a conversation. And you can add this in wherever you can. Like it doesn't, like and if you look at my work too, you're going to be like, he doesn't do this all the time. You know, like he talks a big game, what the hell? And it's like, it's really hard, actually. Really, really hard. So like these are ways for me to like, all right, I've got this one idea, how can I make it better? How can I add things to it? Another part of this is like, how can you allow other people to take ownership of the project or become a part of it? All right, so, another thing that works, I think, is nuance. And so going back to this model, if we think of it in terms of artists and audience, the strengths that artists have and artworks have in activism is that this can work differently. So you've got like a concept, you encode that into an artwork, and then that can actually come out with multiple meanings, right? One might be, this sort of straight ahead, this is what I'm saying. Another one might be a sort of like ironic commentary that is also happening at the same time. A third might be like sort of an emotional thing. They can be absolutely contradictory, right? But you can send a multi-layered message, and the more focused you are about like that goal and who you're communicating to, the more effective this can be. And I like to think of it like a prism, right? So if you shine a really direct light into a prism, then you're more likely to get that rainbow coming out the other side. So being really clear about what your message is and how you're putting it together means that this part might be more successful. You don't have to get lucky, but like, I'm a big fan of planning. Okay, so another thing that works is legibility, and we've been talking about this a lot lately with the center. And one way to think about this is like, how can you speak in a language that people understand? So if people don't know what you're trying to say, or if you don't even know what really you're trying to say, and you're not really clear about that, then it's likely that your audience won't really know either. If you can clarify your vision, the output, is going to be more focused, layered, and complex. So again, thinking about that prism, but also like kinds of language that you use. So when Steve Lambert wrote this book, I just need to get a glass of water, called Dream, Reimagining Progressive Politics in the Age of Fantasy, where like chapter by chapter he looks at like things like Las Vegas or the Grand Theft Auto video game, and it's like people really like this stuff. Let's figure out why they like it and what in there we can use, right? So instead of like scorning popular culture and this is just this bankrupt, corrupt thing, it's like, well, what there is really useful and valuable that we can use, and then also realizing that like this language of popular culture is the popular language, and to try to use it. So, okay, so another big part of this is thinking about the audience. And so when you can say, all right, I want to talk to this group of people, maybe they're at a certain point on that stage where like they want to come, they want to strike on May Day, they've been thinking about it, but they're not really decided on whether or not they're going to do it. What kind of media you can use to get to them. So what's their favorite media? What's their preferred thing? And different kinds of audiences are going to have different kinds of media. They're not necessarily going to be as into the street stencil maybe as they would be something else, where like other audiences would be into the street stencil. And then the last thing is like context. So like, what are the things around them? Can you present this message in? Now, as you do this, it really limits like what you can do. But these limitations can also be freeing, right? Because if you've narrowed it down, there's a bunch of other stuff you don't really have to worry about. When we have too many choices, sometimes it can be almost daunting, right? So if you're like, okay, we're going to try to get people that are thinking about coming to the strike or participating in the strike, and that live, nearby here or something, So that would be the context, a certain type of audience, and then how are we going to reach them? And then it becomes a little bit easier to put together a campaign, and a campaign that'll be successful. The tighter you can like narrow down the audience, the more effective you can be, but it's less efficient. Okay? So if I was to like try to create a message for one person, like you, like I want you to go to, participate in the strike in this like really vibrant way on May 1st, I could like learn a little bit about you, and I could make a really amazing piece that was just for you. And it might not work for you, right? So the more narrow the audience, the easier it is to make something that'll work for you, but it's not going to work for everyone, right? So you kind of have to strike some kind of balance where you hope that it'll work for a lot of people, but it can be really focused at the same time. Okay, let's see. Next thing that works is jokes. I just taught this whole class at the museum school about jokes and comedy and using comedy to talk about difficult things. And I'm really convinced of this. So one of the things we figured out is like jokes are vehicles for transmitting cultural ideas. So it's not the whole idea, right? Like if we had a really great joke about Occupy, it wouldn't tell the whole story of Occupy, right? The how and the why and the whole thing. It would just tell a little piece of it. So it might not have all the nuance we want, it might not have all the history and all that, but it doesn't work in that way. And so if you can take some sort of sentiment about injustice or a feeling, you can use that as an introduction to an issue. If you tried to make it do everything, it would kind of get too big to travel, right? Like the little piece is easier to move around. So the joke is the little piece. Okay, so the other nice thing about this is that you can catch people off guard. So if I told you like, can we just, for the next 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I just want to talk about nuclear weapons, proliferation of nuclear weapons. You'd all be like, okay, sure, I guess. And some of you might try to figure out how to get out the I said, I'm going to tell you a joke, everyone's like, all right, what do you got? And then it happened to be about nuclear weapons, you know, and then I can use that as an entry point to talk about something. Okay, so the other part we figured out is that jokes are like blows, right? So when you strike from below, you have a joke about power. That works really well. So this is like how we deal with bullies. You know, you hear like these cliche stories. You know, this is in the case of me, and when I was in school, I was not the top dog in elementary school. But you know, I could, like, the one sort of leverage point I had is I could be funny. So these jokes are a way of like undermining aggression that way. Great way to deal with cops too. But strikes from below are part of like the American identity of like rebellion and revolution and stuff like that too. Now, strikes from above, from someone more powerful to someone less powerful, are pretty much interpreted as bullying. So when we hear jokes that like can be interpreted as racist or misogynistic, usually there's that power dynamic at play. You can have a joke about race or about, you know, women or something like that, but when there seems to be someone who's more powerful taking a stab at someone who's less powerful, it doesn't play as well. So this is one way that jokes like work as an advantage for us. We're not more powerful usually, you know. Comedy generally is a language that favors the underdog, and so it's uniquely useful for us. The other part is that when you're on equal footing trading jokes, you know, like, and giving each other our time, this is something that equals do, like friends do. You know, you can joke around about your friend because you're on the same playing field. This can be like very humanizing. So one of the things you can do is like, if you're trying to de-escalate a situation, is like turn the joking into something like this. Okay, so another thing we figured out is we can't win a debate against a joker. So this really is our territory, and anyone whose power depends on them being taken seriously can't operate on this territory. So they run into the danger of appearing like a bully or something like that. So if you're, as a joker, you have the ability to shapeshift, and we don't always have to maintain the same character. So you can take on personas or other characters. You can, what's my notes here say? You can also parody your opponents or like try to, you know, like look like them a little bit. You can also sort of take on this character of the villain, where you like, and this is, you'll see in the S-Men movie later, but like sort of exaggerate what your opponent's doing and allow people to laugh at it. One of my students, they all had to write jokes every week, and the one that I think embodies this the best is, now I gotta remember it. It's really good. Oh, what's the worst part about being a heterosexual straight, or a straight white male in the United States? Listening to everybody else complain. So, like, this guy who wrote this joke was like really taking on this sort of character, you know. And it's funny because you know that's what he's doing. So our opponents typically don't have this kind of latitude, you know, like they can't take on characters, they can't become worse forms of themselves. They don't have the ability to like shape-shift in the same way. They pretty much have to be like the one character that they have, right? That's not even usually not even themselves. They represent something else that they have to do. So let's see. Yeah, with jokes we have this sort of latitude with personas and characters, and we should use this. One of the things I've noticed, you've heard this argument with about Jon Stewart, is like, is he a pundit? Like, what does he really think? He should just say what he really thinks, or he should become a pundit instead of a comedian. That when he says, I'm a comedian, you shouldn't take me seriously, that's actually a crutch. But like, if he gave that up, he would lose all of his power, you know, like, because he's a comedian, he can do all these other things that he can't as a pundit. So the last part of this, which I won't go into too much, is that telling jokes is actually really hard. You can see I like, even just remembering it right, like, you can really screw it up. And I gave a much longer talk about jokes at the Hemispheric Institute last week, and I was like, it's so hard, and so like such a narrow path you have to walk, that I'm not even sure it's a good idea to tell you to do it. You know? But and also it's its own art form, and that it takes like, I mean, it can be learned, but it takes a lot of training and, you know, practice and interest and dedication. So, but if it's something that you have an inclination towards already, I think it's a great thing to try to incorporate into your practice as an activist, because, like I said, it's territory that only we can walk on. Okay, so going back here. All this, you saw this. So when I was thinking about making this most recent piece, I made the big Capitalism Works for Me sign. I was realized that like this was last summer too, before Occupy, that capitalism was not really a topic of conversation, right? That if you tried to talk to people about capitalism, it was like saying, "Can I talk to you about Jesus Christ?" And then they're gonna like politely back away. And that the idea of like an alternative to capitalism was not really part of discussion, you know, like. So I decided to focus on these early stages. Usually I shy away from this and try to do something that leans more to the other end of the spectrum, but with this issue, I thought this is what needs to be done. So, okay, so I think this is where a lot of work can be done still with capitalism, because people misunderstand the meaning. I found that, you know, talking to different people, like I have around the country about this so far, that basically they understand that capitalism is like a good thing, that it's basically the same thing as democracy, that it is freedom, right? Like when I show people the sign, they basically read it like as America works for me, that capitalism is somewhere in the US Constitution, and that capitalism is essentially a good thing. You can see this played out in, you know, the Tea Party protests, where, you know, these like weird, convoluted, distorted messages get incorporated and put out in the world, and like, you know, this kind of thing, which seems really simplistic to me, but I'm sure if we talk to the person, they will explain all the details of it. Now, these extreme kind of are definitely a minority, but they are echoes of like this common sentiment about the cultural programming that we have around capitalism, right, and the alternatives. So alternatives, like I was taught in school that there are other systems, and ours isn't perfect, but ours is the best. You know, like this is kind of, I think, I went to a good school too, you know, like California. So, so I was trying to figure out how we could sidestep this programming and get to the idea that, one, we can evaluate the system that we have and decide whether or not, on an individual level, whether or not it's working. And then if it's not, we can imagine better ways, some kind of reform to the new system, and to learn from that. It's basically realizing that capitalism is not the pinnacle of our civilization, and that we could possibly do better, and that we need to consider new ways before or begin discovering them. So that part was like this interaction part of like, whenever people ask what the alternatives are to capitalism, unless sometimes they'll bring up socialism or communism and talk about how terrible it is. I'm like, well, we don't have to, those aren't the only alternatives, there's others. And they'll say, well, what are the other ones? I'll say something better. And then, you know, like, I purposely don't lead them in a specific direction because they need to imagine what that is. So that's the other part, is like the contemplation part, right? Like, what would a world without capitalism, with something better, that are not the, you know, exact same thing that happened in the past, what is this new form? Again, this like goes hand in hand with that awareness part, but it's just leading them another step. So, so let's see. What do I have here? But I usually show these like kind of clips from science fiction movies and stuff that talk about capitalism in this part. I'm going to skip ahead just so we have time to talk. But basically, like, you know, a new system or a system beyond capitalism is very hard to imagine. Our popular culture consists of like, any time there is no capitalism or capitalism is gone, it's like a disaster. It's like some kind of science fiction horror thing. I showed Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, and in the beginning of the movie, they pan into Bartertown, that's where Thunderdome is, you know? And there's no legal system. It's just Tina Turner. And like Bartertown is just, you know, everyone's starving, and you know, the gas companies have all moved out, so there's all these fights with gas and stuff. So like there aren't a lot of really great science fiction movies where capitalism has gone and something better has emerged. We were not really good about that, what that vision is. Okay, so I decided to focus on the first steps here and help people, you know, like evaluate the system we have and think about what they could do. This part, the further part, is like, that's kind of working with organizations, right? Or other pieces of it. The thing I figured out is that it's really hard to make, and I'll just say this like twice, but it's really hard to make one artwork that does all of this. It is really hard to make one artwork that does all of this. I tried for a few years. It's fucking depressing. So like, you know, focusing on one little part, and that might have some side effects of doing other things for other people, that usually works better, but trying to take on the whole thing, like make some kind of silver bullet artwork that as soon as people see it, they're transformed and become a different person, doesn't really work that way. Okay, so I thought about this, took a while, and came up with the sign, which is 20 feet tall, 9 feet tall, 20 feet wide. This is a full-size human man right here. And if you walk up to that podium, it says, "In my life, this is true or false." And the idea is like to really personalize it, right? Because if you start letting the argument become about, is capitalism good or bad for the world or for America, then there's like something to argue. But I can say, yeah, it doesn't really work for me, and like it's harder for arguments to start then. Like works for you, okay? I can't really debate that it does or doesn't work for you. We can talk about it, but I can't fight you over it. Whereas if America, like then you start, okay, well, there's this and there's this, and it becomes much more contentious. So people have to choose, and then it goes up on the scoreboard. Now, one thing I was going to talk about is when you start incorporating creativity into activism, that people don't understand is like that there's a lot of like, so this is like sketches of it, right? Planning and figuring out how big it would be and whether it would work in public space. That this kind of like, there were sketches that came before this too. So this is a digital drawing of it. It's like, I'm pretty good at Photoshop, so it might look real on this projector, but it's not real. But anyway, so the point is like, it's like a different kind of planning, and the earlier versions of this were really terrible. I didn't put them in the slideshow, they're that bad. But that when you start incorporating creativity into this kind of stuff, like you're going to make really terrible stuff. And to realize that and also defend it. When other activists are like, this is a terrible idea, and you'll be like, I know, we're working on it. Anyway, I'll come back to that. So it was produced in Cleveland by a professional sign shop there. So I got a lot of, and the whole community in Cleveland actually was helping out. So these were like volunteers that came in to help me with the wiring. The guys in the sign shop got super into the project and ended up putting in like crazy overtime. This guy built the podium, he's like 80 years old. Wow. And so they were into the project and helped make it happen, and then I had these volunteers from the local art school that were helping out. This was the truck back here in the background. It's the truck that we used to move around. And it was the local Cleveland International Art Handler who was on vacation, and then him and his wife decided to help move the sign on their vacation for free. And then all these other people are also volunteers. So it involved a lot of other people. This is Alex, who engineered the whole thing. He lives here in Boston. And then, a lot of other coordinating people. So a nice thing too is that, there were these people that had sort of hand in making happen. And I tried to, you know, not make it, like while I designed it, you know, there was other ways that people could get involved that weren't just like instrumental, like some people kind of performed with it and things like that. So, okay, then there's, the sign gets moved around. I wish it happened on a truck like this, but it turns out it's too tall and it will hit overpasses. Still working out how to figure that out. But it's going on this tour. It started in Cleveland and now it's here. Next it goes to Hartford, and then I'm still trying to get to Birmingham. We're working that out. This summer I'll be in Santa Fe and then San Diego. Trying to get to Las Vegas, which to me is like more the headquarters of capitalism than anywhere else. And was at the Decordoba. So let's see. And it's going to be touring for the next year or so. So these are some of the people that voted.
Oh my God.
And
I can see my face.
what I'm doing is like collecting information from people about why they voted the way they voted. I have some recordings of them, which hopefully will be loud enough for you guys to hear. Let me just, whoops. Okay. Are our speakers on? Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I feel like you should hear the little, yeah.
Oh, this guy. Anyway, this was a couple, and one of them supported the other one. That was nice. Okay. So yeah, one of these guys supported the other guy. This is the guy who was getting supported. So we went to like farmers markets and street markets and parks and stuff like that. We went to the Cleveland Business District. And so I have some of the videos of people who responded. Some of these they're like, I didn't record them to be played in a setting like this, so there's some background noise, but you should be able to hear it. The other thing is like these early ones, I would just ask questions and get their response. And I do it a little bit differently now, but I'll explain that at the end. So here's a few of them.
Because it always has worked in this country. Free enterprise and capitalism is what built this country. It's when politicians interfere with the process, that's when it fails.
And how is that in your life? Like, how's it worked for you?
It's worked great. I've had a good career. I'm retired now, living a good life.
Great. Anything else you want to say?
I wish our politicians would get their fingers out of everything. That's it.
All right.
I personally am not feeling a terrible punk. I mean, we're both retired, we both have a fairly decent income, and if it were just me caring about me, I suppose we would go on our merry way and not be concerned. But I think if you look around you and see where our society is heading, fewer and fewer people are aggregating more and more wealth at the top of the pyramid. Certainly these wars, as a member of Veterans for Peace, you know, that was kind of my first introduction as to how the war economy has a stranglehold on this country. We have now been in the longest period of armed conflict in the history of our country, 11 years. That's never been the case ever before.
I truthfully know that capitalism works for me.